subscribe. It's kind of like voting for me for president.
Hi, kid. So every Thanksgiving before the big feast, 44 million of us stop to watch the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. 44 million of us.
Can I eat 44 million cookies?
You cannot, Green Bear.
Whoa, then that's a lot.
The parade is in New York, but famous around the world.
My favorite part is the giant balloons.
Me too, Red Bear. But have you ever stopped to think of who invented this giant balloon parade?
Hasn't it always been there? Yeah, like chocolate?
Well, someone had to invent chocolate, and someone had to invent giant balloons unlike any that anyone had ever seen. And you know us, we love stories about people who created things that had never been there before, like balloons over Broadway. This is the true story of the puppeteer of the Macy's parade. Fun fact, he loved collecting toys, not unlike many KidTime StoryTimers. Let's march in. Oh, immediately we are looking at drawings. We see string, we see fabrics, we see materials, things used to create things. And a key to a marionette store. And these right here, these are marionettes, puppets on a string, controlled from up above, like so. And another fun fact for you, Melissa Sweet, the author and illustrator, actually created these toys for her book. And there's our guy right there, Anthony, Tony, Frederick, Sarg. Sarg rhymes with arg. Thanks, little guy. That's Tony Sarg. And he said every little movement has a meaning of its own. And that right there, already on page 1, is a truth bomb! I mean, think about it. If you are a puppeteer, or if you're a dancer, or if you grow up to be a cartoonist or who brings cartoons to life, or if you're a kid who brings toys to life, you already know that every movement has a meaning of its own. From the time he was a little boy, Tony Sarg loved to figure out how to make things move. Look at his room. There's so many contraptions going on in here. He once said he became a marionette man when he was only 6 years old. There's a marionette right there. And did you hear that? 6 years old? That tells me you can already start dreaming and creating. His father had asked him to feed their chickens at 6:30 in the morning. Oh, that's early. Every day. Tony had an idea, though. What if he could feed the chickens without leaving his bed? But how, Tony? How? He rigged up some pulleys and ran rope from the chicken coop door to his bedroom window. And that night, he spread chicken feed outside the chicken coop door. Let's see here. Spread feed the night before out here. And then there's a pull rope, and then that pulls the door open, and the chickens come out. Okay. The next morning, Tony pulled on the rope, and the door to the chicken coop opened, and the chickens ate their breakfast. Tony stayed snug in his bed, and his dad was so impressed he never made Tony do another chore. Bravo, kid. Bravo. When Tony grew up, he moved to London. Oh, my hometown! And in London, he discovered that no one was making marionettes for kids anymore. So out of wood, cloth, and strings, Tony began to make puppets. And if he figured out ways to make his marionettes movements so lifelike that they performed as if they were real actors. Word soon spread about Tony's amazing marionettes. And do you see what I see? Dog! Oh, look at that. He made one that looks just like me. Whoa. And when Tony moved to New York City, the Tony Sarg marionettes began performing on Broadway. And if you're all about New York, they're showing us that Tony's studio was up here in a famous building called the Flatiron Building that kind of looks like, oh, you know what? It looks like that. In the heart of New York City, in Herald Square, was the biggest store on earth, R.H. Macy's department store. They've since dropped the R.H. Macy's had heard about Tony's puppets and asked him to design a puppet parade for the store's holiday windows. So Tony made new puppets based on storybook characters, then attached them to gears and pulleys, which he's so good at, remember, with that contraption with the chickens and the gears and the pulleys and things moving? Gears and pulleys to make them move. And right here we see that he used a classic character, Humpty Dumpty. I shall now recite Humpty's rhyme. Oh, it's okay, Olivia, you don't have to. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Beautifully recited, Olivia the ostrich. Although why an egg would willingly sit on a wall will always be a mystery to me. Macy's Wondertown. In Macy's Wondertown windows, Tony's mechanical marionettes, look at that, danced across the stage as if by magic. All day long they performed to shoppers, jostling for a better look. I can't believe what I'm seeing.
Mama, the wolf is gonna eat Little Red.
Why would an egg sit on a wall? But Macy's had an even bigger job in store for Tony. Many of the people working at Macy's were immigrants, and as the holidays approached, they missed their own holiday traditions of music and dancing in the streets. So Macy's agreed to put on a parade for their employees, and they hired Tony to help. Tony, too, was an immigrant, and he loved the idea of creating a parade based on street carnivals from all over the world. Hi, StoryTeller. Hey, Abuela Bear. Where was Tony from? Well, Abuela Bear, it's a crazy story. He was born in Guatemala. His parents were English and German, and he lived in all those countries before coming to America. Wow, he was born for adventure. So with that kind of a worldly background, of course he was fascinated by the idea of creating a parade based on the street carnivals from all over the world. He made costumes and built horse-drawn floats, and Macy's, check this out, Macy's even arranged to bring in bears, elephants, and camels from the Central Park Zoo.
Wherever something cool is happening, there's a bear.
Truth. The animals joined hundreds of Macy's employees on Thanksgiving Day, 1924. What? Exactly 100 years from when we're now reading this story? They were winding their way from Harlem to Herald Square. It was a dazzling parade. In fact, Macy's first parade was such a success that they decided to have one every year on Thanksgiving Day to celebrate America's own holiday. And this was merely the beginning. Each year, the parade grew, but when Macy's brought in lions and tigers, in addition to the bears, elephants, and camels, the animals roared and growled and frightened the children. Now it's getting good. Obviously, this situation called for a call. Ring, ring. Tony, can you think of something spectacular? Said Mr. Macy. And Tony said, okay. Macy's had asked Tony to replace these animals. Boo, boo, boo.
Now, do we get the big balloons?
We'll see.
Okay.
Yes. Tony hoped to replace the animals with some kind of puppets, but his marionettes were less than 3 feet tall. That's basically like kid size. He would have to make much larger puppets in order for them to be seen in the parade. And how could he make them strong enough to hold up in bad weather, yet light enough to move up and down the street? So many things to consider. Tony knew of a company in Ohio that made blimps out of rubber, the perfect material for any weather. When he called the company, Goodyear, and he showed him his sketches, they agreed to make what Tony wanted. And still, how would Tony make his big puppets move. And now that illustration down there is showing us some really interesting information. Let's see, construct using simple shapes. So here's a big blimp, but these are simple shapes, circles, and glue them together and then paint them different colors, and then decorative legs will be made from fabrics and attached last. So this is how they're thinking about making a creature. And then Tony had another idea from an Indonesian rod puppet in his toy collection. Look at how he's getting inspiration from so many different sources and ideas just from everywhere. He's just suddenly pulling them out of the air in the moment that he needs it. Oof, inspiration is incredible. On Thanksgiving Day, Tony's creatures, some as high as 16 feet, spilled into the streets, and the crowds cheered wildly. Look, here's that creature that we saw drawn on the previous page. The balls of rubber all stuck together, painted, they attached the legs. Part puppet, part balloon, the air-filled rubber bags wobble down the avenue. Propped up by wooden sticks, can you imagine being the first people to ever see such a parade that day? I bet they talked about this day forever. But now, the sidewalks were so packed with people that only those in the first few rows could really see the parade. Tony realized his puppets would have to be even bigger and higher off the ground. And though the sticks helped to steer the puppets, they were stiff and heavy. Tony wanted his balloons to articulate this, to move and gesture, more like puppets. But how?
They should probably just consider bringing back the lions.
With a marionette, the controls are above, like this, and the puppets hang down. But see here, he's trying to work something out here with a string from below. Aha! But what if the controls were below the puppet, and then the puppet could rise up?
Well, that seems pretty obvious to me.
That's because you've already seen it.
That's right.
Because he invented it.
You know what?
What?
I'm in the mood for popping balloons.
Don't pop anything. Okay, so we have the idea, but how to make it a reality? During the next year, Tony set his new idea into motion. This time, he asked the company in Ohio to make balloons out of rubberized silk, as strong as rubber, but lighter than rubber alone. And most important, Tony ordered the balloons to be filled not just with air, but with helium too. Since helium is lighter than air, it would make the balloons rise. Now, once the puppets were completed, they were all deflated and shipped back to Tony in New York, 439 miles away. Now here's a part that was probably freaking Tony out and possibly Mr. Macy. Tony did not know if everything would go as planned. What if the balloons are filled with too much helium?
Bye-bye balloon.
What if one hits a sharp object?
Bye-bye balloon.
And will they fit under the elevated train track?
Bye-bye balloon.
It was still dark on Thanksgiving morning when Tony filled the balloons with helium, tethering them down with sandbags. By 1 p.m., the sidewalks were packed with people ready for the parade because you know everyone wants to see what's up this year. Then, one by one, Tony cut the lines to the sandbags.
No! Why is he cutting the lines? They'll float away!
Yes.
No, Red Bear. He's not going to let go. He's going to cut them and hand them to the people who are going to then walk the balloons down the street.
Oh, good!
Bummer.
Let's have a parade! Oh, look at this gorgeous elephant. And you know, everyone can see this one, not just the people in the front row. And the magnificent upside-down marionettes rose up to the sky. How beautiful. Can you imagine how exciting it must have been to be the first group of people ever to see something like this? The big, giant balloons. Nodding and waving to the crowds below, they sailed past Central Park. They sallied down Broadway. They shimmied and swayed through the canyons of New York City, where people really do watch the parade from their windows and even have parade watching parties. It was a raging success, but can you imagine not knowing if anything would work until that very morning?
That's almost as stressful as a surprise spelling test.
Almost. High above the crowds, they flounced in the afternoon wind, pulling the rope handlers this way and that. They're holding on. Whoa, hold on there, buddy. Holding on. Yet with every heave-ho, the balloons gestured and articulated like wild puppets, and the crowd screamed for more. After the balloons were eased under the L, no disasters there, they ended in front of Macy's at Tony's Wondertown windows. It was a parade New Yorkers would never forget.
Or the world.
And from that day on, every Thanksgiving morning, crowds have lined the sidewalks of New York City to see what new balloons would rise to the skies for Macy's famous parade. Wow! Woo! It's even bigger than I imagined. I'm so happy right now. Tony Sarg, the puppeteer who loved to figure out how to make things move and articulate, had set the stage with a little rigging for a puppet to be anything anyone could imagine it to be. What a gift Tony Sarg gave us, right?
I guess.
You guess?
I mean, if you're into parades with no angry tigers or crying children.
Yes.
Same. And Tony Sarg's imagination is yet another thing that we can be thankful for.
I want a bat balloon.